The red dirt of Mars felt cold beneath Lieutenant Sarah Chen's broken body as she pressed her back against the twisted metal remnants of what had once been forward operating Base Liberty. Above her, the alien sky burned with the trails of descending Keftar warships, their sleek hulls cutting through the thin atmosphere like silver knives. But it wasn't the approaching enemy that made her blood run cold, it was the sound of laughter echoing across the battlefield. Galactic Coalition soldiers, beings from a dozen different worlds, stood in a loose circle around the tattered American flag that still flew defiantly from its bent pole. The fabric snapped in the Martian wind, its red, white, and blue colors stark against the rust-colored landscape. To Sarah, lying wounded and forgotten in the rubble, that flag represented everything her unit had died defending. To the Coalition forces, it was apparently nothing more than a joke. "Look at this primitive symbol," chittered Vex High Commander Zithera, his insectoid features twisted in what passed for amusement among his species. His forearms gestured dismissively at the flag as his compound eyes glittered with malicious humor. "The humans actually believe this piece of cloth will protect them." A Gordanian warrior, his purple scales gleaming in the dying light, let out a rumbling laugh that sounded like grinding stone. "My ancestors conquered 17 star systems before these mammals even learned to make fire," he boomed, his voice carrying easily across the battlefield. "And they think their freedom makes them special." Sarah gritted her teeth against the pain radiating from her shattered ribs and tried to move. The plasma blast that had taken down her unit had caught her in the blast radius, throwing her 30 feet into the debris of their command post. Her left leg was definitely broken, possibly in multiple places, and something warm and sticky was spreading across her combat fatigues. But she was alive, and as long as she drew breath, she wouldn't let these alien bastards mock what her brothers and sisters had died for. The Keftar invasion had come without warning 6 months ago. Their fleet had materialized at the edge of the solar system like a nightmare made manifest, thousands of ships, each one capable of cracking a moon in half. Earth's defenses had held for exactly 17 minutes. Mars had lasted 3 days. Now, with the red planet's orbital defense platforms reduced to glowing scrap metal and its military installations burning across 2 continents, the Galactic Coalition had finally decided to send help. Too little, too late, and with an attitude that made Sarah wonder if humanity wouldn't be better off fighting alone. "The Terrans have such quaint traditions," mused a tall, ethereal being whose name Sarah couldn't pronounce but whose species looked like walking praying mantises made of living crystal. The Zephyrian's voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, beautiful and utterly contemptuous. "They attach emotional significance to symbols." "How wonderfully primitive." Commander Zithera's mandibles clicked in agreement. "Their whole species is built on these delusions of grandeur." "Land of the free, home of the brave," he quoted in mocking English, having clearly studied human culture enough to twist it into an insult. As if courage could somehow overcome superior technology and tactical brilliance. The truth was, the Coalition forces weren't wrong about the technological gap. The Keftar had weapons that could turn matter into energy, shields that could deflect anything in humanity's arsenal, and ships that moved through space like thoughts through a dreaming mind. Earth's greatest military achievements looked like stone tools compared to what was bearing down on them. The Coalition's weapons weren't much better, they were maybe a century ahead of human technology instead of a millennium, but it was enough to make the difference between fighting and dying. What none of these alien warriors understood, what they couldn't comprehend despite their advanced civilizations and their superior intellects, was that the flag meant something more than cloth and die to the humans who served under it. It represented an idea that had driven ordinary people to extraordinary acts for centuries. It stood for the belief that some things were worth fighting for even when the odds were impossible, worth dying for even when death was certain. Sarah had joined the Marines straight out of high school in Detroit, driven by a need to serve something larger than herself. Her grandfather had stormed the beaches of Normandy under that same flag. Her father had carried it through the jungles of Vietnam. She had planted it in the red soil of Mars during humanity's first major colonial military operation, and she'd be damned if she'd let these alien soldiers treat it like garbage while she still had strength left in her body. The Coalition forces were setting up their command post less than 50 meters from her position, apparently confident that the battlefield was secure. Their portable shelters materialized from compact deployment units, creating a small base of operations that would have taken human engineers days to construct. Advanced medical stations hummed to life, ready to treat alien physiology with treatments that seemed more like magic than medicine. Energy shields flickered into existence around the perimeter, protecting the Coalition forces from any stray Keftar weapons fire. But they hadn't bothered to check for human survivors. Why would they? The preliminary scans would have shown massive casualties, and coalition doctrine apparently didn't include wasting resources on primitive allies who couldn't contribute meaningfully to the war effort. Sarah was just another piece of battlefield debris to them, as irrelevant as the scattered weapons and shattered concrete around her. The irony wasn't lost on her. These beings had traveled across the galaxy, supposedly to help defend Earth and its colonies from the Kethtar threat. They had technologies that could reshape reality, weapons that could crack planets, and the combined military might have dozens of advanced civilizations. But they had no understanding of what made humans fight harder when the odds got worse, what drove them to plant flags on hostile worlds and defend them until their last breath. A new voice joined the conversation around the flag, this one belonging to a Zorathi commander whose species looked like bipedal wolves crossed with classical dragons. His scaled hide was deep blue-black, and his voice carried the rumbling authority of a natural predator. "The humans serve their purpose," he said with casual dismissal. "They die bravely enough, and their deaths buy us time to position our real forces. But, expecting them to contribute meaningfully to actual military operations? That's asking rather much of such a young species." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd lost 17 good Marines in the defense of this position, men and women who'd fought against impossible odds because they believed the coalition would support them. They'd died thinking their sacrifice meant something, that their allies valued their contribution to the war effort. To discover that the coalition saw them as nothing more than cannon fodder, expendable distractions to occupy the enemy while real soldiers did the important work, was almost worse than the pain from her injuries. Commander Zithara's compound eyes glittered as he reached toward the flag with one of his 4 hands. "Perhaps we should relocate this memorial somewhere less prominent. It serves no tactical purpose, and its presence might give other human units unrealistic expectations about their importance to this operation." That was enough. Sarah Chen had tolerated the mockery, endured the casual dismissal of her species' capabilities, and listened to her fallen comrades being written off as acceptable losses. But she would not lie broken in the dirt and watch these alien soldiers desecrate the flag that her Marines had died defending. Using her rifle as a makeshift crutch, Sarah hauled herself to her feet. The movement sent waves of agony through her broken body, and she felt something warm and wet running down her face, blood from a head wound she hadn't even noticed. Her left leg couldn't support any weight, and her vision kept threatening to gray out around the edges. But she was standing, and her weapon was still functional, and sometimes that was enough. The coalition soldiers were so focused on their discussion that they didn't notice her movement at first. It wasn't until Sarah chambered around with a sharp metallic click that the alien warriors spun to face her. Their expressions, what she could read of them across species barriers, ranged from surprise to annoyance to something that might have been respect. "Step away from the flag," Sarah said, her voice hoarse but steady. Blood from her head wound had crusted over her left eye, and she could taste copper in her mouth, but her grip on the rifle was firm. "That's United States Marine Corps property, and you don't have permission to touch it." Commander Zithara's mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among his species. "Lieutenant Chen, according to our medical scanners, you should be dead, or at least unconscious. Human physiology is more resilient than our databases indicated." "Funny thing about humans," Sarah replied, keeping her weapon trained on the insectoid commander. "We don't always do what the databases say we should do. Now step away from the flag." The Gordanian warrior let out another rumbling laugh. "You're outnumbered 12 to 1, injured, and your weapon wouldn't penetrate our personal shields even if you were healthy. This is pointless." Sarah's finger tightened slightly on the trigger. "Maybe. But I'll put holes in whoever touches that flag first, and maybe a few others before you bring me down. Question is, who wants to volunteer?" For a moment, the battlefield was silent except for the whistle of Martian wine through the ruins. The coalition soldiers had weapons that could vaporize her before she could blink, shields that could turn her bullets into harmless sparks, and medical technology that could heal wounds she couldn't even survive. But something in her stance, something in the way she held herself despite her obvious injuries, gave them pause. It was the Zorathi commander who broke the silence. "You would die for a piece of cloth?" Sarah's laugh was bitter but genuine. "You really don't get it, do you? None of you understand what that flag represents. You see primitive symbolism. I see every American who ever stood up to a bully, every soldier who fought against impossible odds because it was the right thing to do. I see the idea that some things are worth defending even when the smart money says to run. Ideas don't stop plasma fire, the crystal-like Zephyrian observed in its musical voice. Symbols don't deflect energy weapons. Your emotional attachment to that object is tactically irrelevant. Is it? Sarah asked. Because I'm standing here ready to die for it, and you're all standing there wondering if I'm crazy enough to actually do it. Seems to me like that symbol just changed the tactical situation pretty significantly. The truth was, Sarah knew she was probably going to die in the next few minutes. Her injuries were severe enough that medical attention was urgent, and even if the coalition soldiers didn't kill her outright, her condition was deteriorating rapidly. But, if she was going to die, she was going to die on her feet, defending the flag that represented everything her unit had died for. More coalition soldiers were arriving now, drawn by the standoff. Sarah counted at least 20 different beings representing a dozen species, all armed with weapons that could end her life without effort. But, none of them moved toward the flag. They watched her with expressions ranging from puzzlement to irritation to something that might have been curiosity. Your position is untenable, Commander Zithera pointed out reasonably. You cannot maintain this standoff indefinitely, and we have a war to fight. Be practical, Lieutenant. Lower your weapon, accept medical treatment, and allow us to proceed with our mission. Sarah shook her head, a movement that sent fresh waves of pain through her skull. My mission isn't over yet, Commander. That flag stays where it is, and anyone who wants to move it goes through me first. The standoff stretched on, alien soldiers and wounded Marines staring at each other across a few meters of red dirt while the stars wheeled overhead and enemy ships continued their descent toward the planet's surface. It should have been absurd, one broken human holding off a platoon of advanced alien warriors with nothing but stubborn courage and a determination to protect a symbol they couldn't understand. But, in the growing darkness of a Martian evening, with the sound of distant artillery echoing across the horizon and the acrid smell of burning installations carried on the wind, it felt like the most important battle Sarah Chen had ever fought. Not because the tactical situation mattered, but because some things were worth defending regardless of the odds. The coalition soldiers might have superior technology, better weapons, and the military might have dozens of worlds behind them. But they had never learned the lesson that every human warrior carried into battle, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to stand and fight despite the fear, to plant your flag on hostile ground and defend it until your last breath. And, sometimes, that was enough to change everything. The Keftar dropships screamed overhead like metallic thunder, their alien engines leading contrails of superheated plasma across the Martian sky. In the Coalition command post, sophisticated sensors tracked their descent with mathematical precision, calculating impact zones and deployment patterns with the cold efficiency of advanced technology. But none of those sensors detected the lone figure moving through the shadows beyond their perimeter. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Ghost Rodriguez had been dead for 6 hours, according to official records. His biometric signature had flatlined during the initial Keftar assault on Firebase Prometheus, 30 kilometers northeast of the current position. His transponder had gone silent, his last known coordinates were now a smoking crater, and Coalition databases had automatically updated his status to key a pending body recovery. The databases were wrong. Rodriguez crept through the ruins of a Martian research station, his advanced reconnaissance gear painting a three-dimensional map of the Coalition position on his heads-up display. The SEAL team he'd been assigned to had been wiped out in the first wave of the attack, caught in the open by Keftar hunter-killers that moved faster than human reflexes could track. He'd survived by doing what Navy SEALs did best, becoming invisible when the odds turned impossible. For the past 6 hours, he'd been moving across the battlefield like a ghost, avoiding Keftar patrols and Coalition forces alike. His mission parameters had been clear: gather intelligence on enemy movements, identify high-value targets, and report back to command. Simple enough, except command no longer existed. The orbital platforms were gone, the communication networks were down, and every friendly installation within 100 kilometers was either destroyed or under enemy control. Every friendly installation except this one, where Coalition forces had established their forward command post around what looked like the remnants of a Marine position. Rodriguez could see the American flag through his scope, still flying despite the battle damage to its pole. More importantly, he could see the woman standing beneath it, facing down an entire platoon of alien warriors with nothing but a rifle and more courage than sense. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, according to the data his reconnaissance gear pulled from her uniform transponder. Marines, 2nd Battalion, 7th Regiment. Her biometric readings were concerning significant blood loss, multiple fractures, probable concussion, but she was on her feet and holding her ground against impossible odds. The kind of impossible odds that Navy SEALs were trained to tip in the other direction. Rodriguez studied the tactical situation through his scope with the calm professionalism of a man who'd spent 15 years making the impossible look routine. The coalition forces had superior numbers and equipment, but they were focused entirely on the standoff with Chen. Their perimeter security was minimal, designed to detect incoming Keftar forces rather than infiltrating human operators. Their attention was divided between the wounded Marine and the approaching enemy dropships. More importantly, their command structure was clustered around the flag, making targeting decisions easy. The Navy SEAL reached into his gear bag and withdrew something that looked like a standard fragmentation grenade but definitely wasn't. The device was matte black, about the size of a tennis ball, and covered in sensors that would have made coalition technology specialists very interested if they'd been given the chance to examine it. But they wouldn't get that chance, because the Mark 7 adaptive reconnaissance drone was designed to be invisible until it was far too late to matter. Rodriguez armed the device with a series of finger taps that activated its stealth systems. The drone's surface immediately began to shift and change, mimicking the optical properties of its surroundings until it effectively vanished from visual detection. Its movement systems engaged with barely audible whispers of displaced air, lifting it from his palm and sending it drifting toward the coalition position like a piece of wind-blown debris. The SEAL had originally planned to use the drone for intelligence gathering, but circumstances had changed. Lieutenant Chen was making a stand that deserved support, and Rodriguez had never been the type to let a fellow warrior fight alone when he could tip the scales. The drone would give him real-time tactical data on every coalition soldier's position, equipment status, and movement patterns. More importantly, it would give him the ability to create precisely the right kind of chaos at exactly the right moment. Through his earpiece, Rodriguez could hear fragments of the conversation around the flag. The coalition soldiers were debating what to do about Chen, discussing her motivations with the detached interest of scientists observing an interesting specimen. Their casual dismissal of human military capabilities made his jaw clench. These alien warriors thought they understood warfare because they had better weapons and longer lifespans. They were about to learn that technological superiority meant nothing when it faced an enemy that refused to quit. The drone settled into position 30 meters above the coalition command post, its sensors painting detailed profiles of every individual below. Rodriguez's heads-up display filled with tactical data, weapon types, shield strength, communication frequencies, command hierarchy. The information was more than enough to plan an operation that would demonstrate exactly why human special forces had the reputation they did. But, before he could act, the tactical situation changed again. A new voice cut through the standoff, speaking with the authority of absolute command. "What exactly is happening here?" Rodriguez shifted his scope to identify the speaker and felt his blood run cold. Admiral Fexval of the Hegemony Fleet, one of the most decorated coalition commanders in the galaxy. The being stood nearly 3 meters tall, his sleek, predatory form moving with the fluid grace of a born killer. His species had been spacefaring when humans were still learning to make fire, and his personal combat record included victories against enemies that could reduce planets to cosmic dust. But, more importantly, Admiral Fexval was the commanding officer for the Coalition's entire Mars defense operation. If Rodriguez could eliminate him, the alien command structure would collapse just as the Keftar assault forces were landing. The confusion would buy Earth precious time to reorganize its defenses, maybe even turn the tide of the battle. The SEAL's finger moved to the targeting stud on his rifle. The weapon was a prototype railgun that fired depleted uranium penetrators at a significant fraction of light speed. It could punch through personal shields that would stop conventional bullets, and, at this range, even Admiral Fexval's advanced armor wouldn't provide protection. One shot, properly placed, and the Coalition's Mars command would be decapitated. But, taking that shot would expose his position and bring the entire Coalition force down on Lieutenant Chen's head. The Marine was barely standing as it was. She wouldn't survive a firefight against 20 alien warriors, no matter how much courage she had. Rodriguez would have to choose between a high-value target that could change the course of the battle and a fellow warrior who deserved his support. The choice took him exactly 1 second to make. Admiral Fexval's voice carried easily across the battlefield as he addressed the standoff. "Commander Zithera, explain why you are allowing a wounded primitive to delay our operations." The insectoid commander's mandibles clicked nervously. "Admiral, the human refuses to allow us to relocate their symbolic object. She claims territorial authority over this position." "Territorial authority?" The Admiral's laugh was like breaking glass. A single injured mammal claims territorial authority against the hegemony fleet? This is either courage beyond reason or madness beyond measure. Rodriguez watched through his scope as the Admiral moved closer to Chen's position. The Marine's grip on her rifle tightened, but her stance remained steady despite her obvious pain. Blood had dried on her face, her uniform was torn and stained, and her left leg was clearly unable to support her weight properly. But she stood her ground, facing down one of the galaxy's most feared military commanders with nothing but stubborn human determination. "You are Lieutenant Sarah Chen," Admiral Fexval said, consulting a holographic display that materialized in front of him. "According to our records, your unit suffered 100% casualties during the initial Keftar assault. You should be dead." "Sorry to disappoint you, Admiral," Chen replied, her voice hoarse but steady. "But I'm still here, and that flag is still flying. You want to move it, you'll have to go through me first." The Admiral studied her for a long moment, his predatory features unreadable. "You would sacrifice your life for a piece of cloth? Your species' attachment to symbols is a tactical weakness that evolution should have eliminated millions of years ago." Rodriguez felt his finger tighten on the trigger. The shot was clean, the target was stationary, and eliminating Admiral Fexval would be worth more than a dozen conventional military victories. But Chen was directly in the line of fire now, and the Admiral's personal shields would require multiple penetrator rounds to breach. The Marine would be caught in the crossfire. The SEAL forced himself to relax and consider other options. His drone was still in position above the coalition forces, its sensors tracking their movements and communication patterns. If he couldn't take the clean shot at the Admiral, maybe he could create enough chaos to give Chen a fighting chance while accomplishing his primary mission objectives. "Your flag is meaningless," Admiral Fexval continued, moving even closer to Chen's position. "Your resistance is pointless. Your species will be extinct within a generation, consumed by enemies you cannot comprehend and abandoned by allies who see you as expendable. Why die for nothing?" Chen's laugh was bitter but genuine. "You really think this is about the flag? You think I'm standing here bleeding for a piece of cloth?" "Then, explain it to me," the Admiral said, his voice carrying what might have been genuine curiosity. "Help me understand why your species chooses futile gestures over practical survival." Rodriguez activated his drone's audio systems, turning the device into a sophisticated listening post. The conversation below was becoming something more than a simple standoff, it was turning into a dialogue between two completely different philosophies of warfare. The Admiral represented the Coalition's approach, overwhelming technological superiority applied with mathematical precision. Chen represented something else entirely, something the alien commanders clearly didn't understand. "That flag," Chen said, gesturing toward the tattered fabric with her free hand while keeping her rifle trained on the Admiral, represents an idea. The idea that ordinary people can choose to do extraordinary things when something important is at stake. The idea that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being afraid and standing your ground anyway. Ideas are abstractions, Admiral Fexval replied dismissively. They have no mass, no energy, no effect on the physical universe. How can an abstraction justify self-destruction? Because ideas are the only things that last, Chen shot back. Your ships will rust, your weapons will break, your empire will fall. But the idea that freedom is worth fighting for? That some things matter more than survival? That idea will outlive all of us. Rodriguez found himself nodding in agreement as he watched the exchange through his scope. Chen was putting into words something that every human warrior understood instinctively but could rarely articulate. The reason they fought wasn't just for territory or resources or even survival, it was for the belief that some principles were worth defending regardless of the cost. The Admiral's response was cut off by a new alarm echoing across the Coalition position. The Keftar dropships had reached the outer atmosphere, and their landing trajectories were being projected on holographic displays throughout the command post. Rodriguez could see Coalition officers and technicians scrambling to prepare for the incoming assault, their attention finally shifting away from the standoff around the flag. It was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Rodriguez triggered his drone's offensive systems, sending it diving toward the Coalition's primary communication array. The device struck the alien equipment with the force of a guided missile, its compact explosive charge detonating in a flash of white light that temporarily overloaded every optical sensor in the area. The blast was precisely calibrated, powerful enough to destroy critical systems but not large enough to harm personnel who weren't standing directly next to the target. In the confusion that followed, Rodriguez moved. The Navy SEAL came down from his concealed position like a force of nature, his enhanced combat gear allowing him to cover the distance to the Coalition perimeter in seconds. His rifle spat depleted uranium penetrators with mechanical precision, each shot targeted at equipment rather than personnel. Communication relays sparked and died, sensor arrays collapsed into twisted metal, and power conduits ruptured in showers of exotic energy. The Coalition soldiers spun to face this new threat, their weapons charging and their shields activating with practiced efficiency. But Rodriguez had already shifted position, using the chaos and smoke from his drone strike to become invisible again. Their return fire struck empty air while he flanked around their position, sowing destruction among their support systems. Unknown human operative, Admiral Fexbell's voice cut through the noise of battle. Identify yourself and your objectives. Rodriguez triggered his suit's communication systems, broadcasting on all Coalition frequencies simultaneously. His voice was calm, professional, and utterly without mercy. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs. My objective is simple, Admiral. You wanted to know what that flag represents? You're about to find out. The Coalition command post erupted into controlled chaos as alien warriors scrambled to respond to the sudden attack. Admiral Fexbell's voice cut through the noise like a blade, issuing orders in multiple languages while tactical displays flickered to life around him. But the damage was already done. Rodriguez's precision strikes had crippled their communication networks and sensor arrays just as the Keftar assault forces were beginning their final approach. Sarah Chen used the distraction to her advantage, shifting her position to put her back against the flagpole while maintaining her weapon's aim at the Coalition soldiers around her. The pain from her injuries was becoming harder to ignore, and she could feel her strength ebbing with each passing minute. But the arrival of the Navy SEAL had changed the tactical equation dramatically, and she wasn't about to waste the opportunity. Rodriguez materialized from the shadows like a predator made of smoke and violence. His advanced camouflage suit rendered him nearly invisible until he chose to reveal himself, and when he did, it was with the controlled aggression of a man who had spent years perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare. The weapon in his hand spat depleted uranium penetrators with mechanical precision, each shot carefully targeted to disable equipment rather than kill personnel. Interesting tactical choice, Admiral Fexbell observed, his predatory features showing what might have been respect. You could have eliminated half my command staff with your opening volley, but you chose to target our infrastructure instead. Are you attempting to capture us alive? Rodriguez's reply came through his suit's external speakers, his voice distorted by tactical scramblers but still carrying the unmistakable authority of a professional warrior. I'm not here to capture anyone, Admiral. I'm here to teach you something about human warfare. The SEAL's next movement was a masterclass in special operations tactics. Instead of engaging the Coalition forces directly, he used their own positioning against them. A precisely placed charge brought down a section of their portable command shelter, forcing them to spread out across the battlefield. A few well-aimed shots disabled their remaining sensor equipment, leaving them partially blind to his movements. And, all the while, he kept moving, never staying in one position long enough for their superior weapons to lock onto his signature. Commander Zithera's mandibles clicked in frustration as his forces tried to coordinate a response without their usual technological advantages. He's using our own tactics against us, the insectoid officer reported. Degrading our capabilities systematically while avoiding direct confrontation. No, Admiral Fexbell corrected, his voice carrying a note of what might have been admiration. He's using human tactics. This is something entirely different from our doctrine. The Admiral was right, and Saracen could see it playing out in real time. The Coalition forces were used to overwhelming technological superiority applied with mathematical precision. They fought like scientists conducting an experiment, analyzing variables and applying solutions with cold efficiency. Rodriguez fought like an artist creating chaos, using intuition and improvisation to turn the battlefield into his canvas. A Gordanian heavy weapons specialist tried to flank the SEAL's position, moving with the ponderous strength of his species. Rodriguez anticipated the maneuver, using a small explosive charge to bring down a section of rubble that blocked the alien warrior's advance while simultaneously creating a new firing position for himself. The Gordanian's return fire shattered the empty space where Rodriguez had been standing moments before. He's not fighting to win, observed the crystal-like Zephyrian, its musical voice carrying undertones of puzzlement. His tactics are focused on disruption rather than victory. What is his objective? Sarah could have answered that question, but she saved her breath for more important things. Rodriguez wasn't trying to defeat the coalition forces, that would have been impossible given the numerical and technological odds. Instead, he was doing what special operations soldiers did best, changing the rules of engagement, turning a conventional battle into something else entirely. The sound of approaching Keftar dropships was getting louder now, their alien engines creating a harmony of destruction that echoed across the Martian landscape. Admiral Fexval's tactical displays showed their descent trajectories with mathematical precision, but, without his communication networks and sensor arrays, coordinating a proper defense would be exponentially more difficult. Which was exactly what Rodriguez had intended. "Chief Rodriguez," the Admiral called out, his voice carrying across the battlefield with the authority of absolute command. "Your opening moves are impressive, but you cannot maintain this level of operational tempo indefinitely. What are your terms for surrender?" The SEAL's laugh echoed from somewhere in the ruins, impossible to localize despite the coalition's efforts to triangulate his position. "Surrender? Admiral, you still don't understand what you're dealing with. Americans don't surrender. We just find new ways to fight." To prove his point, Rodriguez triggered another drone from his equipment pack. This one was different from the first, smaller, faster, and designed for a very specific purpose. It streaked across the battlefield like a metallic hummingbird, too small and quick for the coalition's weapons to track effectively. But, instead of targeting their equipment, it headed straight for their personnel. The drone's payload wasn't explosive, it was informational. As it buzzed around the coalition soldiers, it deployed thousands of microtransmitters, each one no larger than a grain of sand. The devices attached themselves to armor, equipment, and exposed skin, creating a real-time tracking network that fed data directly back to Rodriguez's heads-up display. Now he could see through walls, track movement in real time, and predict their tactical responses before they were fully formed. The technological advantage that the coalition had enjoyed was suddenly turned against them, their own superior equipment becoming the foundation for an intelligence network that no human military unit should have been able to deploy. "Fascinating," Admiral Fexval murmured, studying his own tactical displays as they registered the microtransmitter deployment. "You're using our technological superiority as a weakness. The more advanced our equipment, the more vulnerable we become to infiltration and subversion." "Now you're starting to get it," Rodriguez replied, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Humans don't fight fair, Admiral. We fight to win." The distinction was crucial, and Sarah Chen could see that the Admiral was beginning to understand it. The coalition forces fought with honor, following established rules of engagement that had been developed over millennia of interstellar warfare. They used overwhelming force applied with precise efficiency, minimizing casualties and collateral damage while achieving clear military objectives. Human warfare was something else entirely. It was chaos given purpose, desperation transformed into strategy. When faced with impossible odds, humans didn't accept defeat, they changed the definition of victory. They fought dirty, used the enemy's strengths against them, and turned every disadvantage into an opportunity for creative destruction. The Keftar dropships were entering the final phase of their approach now, their hulls glowing with atmospheric friction as they prepared to disgorge their assault forces. Admiral Fexval's remaining tactical systems showed dozens of enemy craft converging on their position, each one carrying enough firepower to level a city block. The coalition forces should have been preparing coordinated defensive positions, integrating their superior technology into overlapping fields of fire. Instead, they were scattered across the battlefield, their command structure disrupted, their communication networks compromised, and their attention divided between the approaching enemy and the human operators who had turned their safe rear area into a combat zone. It was Rodriguez who broke the tactical stalemate with his next move. The Navy SEAL appeared on a ridge overlooking the coalition position, his camouflage suit deactivated and his weapon clearly visible. He was completely exposed, an easy target for any of the alien warriors below. But, instead of firing, he triggered something that looked like a standard flare gun, sending a brilliant red signal rocket arcing high into the Martian sky. "Signal rocket," Commander Zithara reported unnecessarily. "Standard human distress beacon. But, there are no other human forces within response range." Admiral Fexval's eyes, all six of them, focused on the SEAL with predatory intensity. "That's not a distress beacon," he said slowly. "That's a targeting designator." The Admiral was right, but his understanding came too late. High above the Martian atmosphere, a constellation of human military satellites that the coalition had assumed were destroyed began to respond to Rodriguez's signal. The satellites were stealthed, hardened against electromagnetic pulse, and equipped with kinetic bombardment systems that could deliver tungsten rods with the force of small nuclear weapons. But that wasn't what Rodriguez had called down on their position. The first indication that something was wrong came from the Coalition's atmospheric sensors, which detected multiple objects entering the upper atmosphere at impossible speeds. The objects were too small to be ships, too fast to be conventional missiles, and moving with trajectories that defied every known law of orbital mechanics. They were human. 12 figures plummeted from orbit like falling stars, their bodies encased in atmospheric entry suits that turned them into living meteors. They hit the Martian atmosphere at speeds that should have been instantly fatal, their suits glowing white-hot as they carved trails of superheated plasma through the thin air. But, instead of burning up on entry, they used the planet's gravitational field and atmospheric resistance to control their descent with mathematical precision. Orbital drop assault, a tactical concept that most species considered theoretical at best and suicidal at worst. But humans had turned it into an operational reality, creating soldiers who could literally fall from the heavens to strike at the heart of enemy positions. Navy SEAL Team 6, Rodriguez announced with obvious pride. Operational designation, Fallen Angels. They've been in orbit for 3 days, waiting for a target worth the drop. Admiral Fexval watched the descending figures with something approaching awe. Your species weaponizes everything, he observed. Even gravity itself becomes a tool of war. Improvise, adapt, overcome, Rodriguez replied. It's not just a motto, Admiral. It's how we've survived this long in a galaxy full of things trying to kill us. The 12 SEALs hit the ground in a perfect circle around the Coalition position, their impact suits absorbing kinetic energy that would have liquefied any normal human. They shed their atmospheric gear with practiced efficiency, revealing warriors equipped with the most advanced human military technology available. Each one carried weapons that could punch through Coalition shields, sensors that could track Keftar movements, and the kind of combat experience that only came from years of fighting impossible odds. But, more importantly, they carried something that no amount of technology could replicate, the absolute certainty that they would complete their mission regardless of the cost. They had fallen from orbit to reach this battlefield, and they weren't leaving until every enemy was eliminated or they were dead. Sarah-chan felt tears mixing with the blood on her cheeks as she watched the SEALs form up around the flag she'd been defending. These weren't just reinforcements, they were a statement of principle. The American flag might be just a piece of cloth to alien observers, but, to these warriors, it represented something worth falling from heaven to protect. Now do you understand what that flag means? She asked Admiral Fexval, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent battlefield. It's not about the cloth. It's about the promise. The promise that when Americans are in trouble, help will come. No matter how far. No matter how impossible the odds. The Admiral looked from the wounded Marine to the Navy SEALs to the flag snapping in the Martian wind, and, for the first time since the battle began, his predatory features showed something that might have been understanding. Yes, he said quietly. I think I'm beginning to see. The Keftar dropships struck the Martian surface like hammers of the gods, their landing thrusters carving craters into the red earth as they disgorged their assault forces. Each vessel carried 40 of the galaxy's most efficient killers, beings evolved for war across 100 conquered worlds, equipped with weapons that could reshape matter at the molecular level. They moved with the mechanical precision of a hive mind, flowing across the battlefield like liquid death in search of targets to destroy. They found the Coalition forces first. Admiral Fexval's scattered command was caught between the landing Keftar and the human operators who had systematically dismantled their tactical advantage. Without their communication networks and sensor arrays, the Coalition soldiers fought as individuals rather than a coordinated unit. Their superior technology meant nothing when they couldn't coordinate its deployment, and their numerical advantage evaporated as the Keftar assault forces spread across the battlefield. The first alien casualties came within seconds of the landing. Commander Zithara's insectoid form was caught in the open as a Keftar heavy weapons team established a firing position on the ridge above the command post. The energy beam that struck him was designed to disrupt molecular bonds, and the insectoid commander simply ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. But, instead of panicking or retreating, something unexpected happened to the Coalition forces. They began to fight like humans. The Gordanian heavy weapons specialist who had been trying to flank Rodriguez earlier found himself facing 3 Keftar warriors advancing with the inexorable patience of machines. Instead of falling back to a defensive position and calling for support that would never come, he charged directly into their formation. His species' natural armor turned the first energy blast into harmless light, and his massive fists crushed alien skulls with the sound of breaking pottery. The crystal-like Zephyrian abandoned its usual graceful movement patterns and began using the battlefield debris as cover, popping up to deliver precisely aimed shots before disappearing again. Its musical voice had changed, becoming something harder and more focused as it adapted to the reality of fighting without technological superiority. Even the remaining coalition officers were changing their tactics, moving with the desperate creativity that came from facing extinction. They used rubble and wreckage to create impromptu fortifications, set up crossfire zones without sophisticated sensor networks, and began targeting enemy equipment rather than just enemy personnel. They were learning to fight like the species they had dismissed as primitive. Rodriguez watched the transformation through his scope with professional interest. The coalition forces were discovering something that every human warrior knew instinctively: when you couldn't rely on superior equipment or overwhelming numbers, you had to rely on superior will. The decision to keep fighting when logic said you were already dead, to find advantages where none should exist, to turn desperation into a tactical asset. But the SEAL's attention was focused on a more immediate problem. The Keftar assault forces were establishing a perimeter around the coalition position, their movements coordinated with the precision of a computer simulation. They weren't trying to overrun the defenders, they were systematically eliminating escape routes while bringing their heavy weapons to bear. In 5 minutes, maybe less, the entire area would be nothing but superheated plasma and twisted metal. That gave Rodriguez's team exactly 4.5 minutes to turn the tide of the battle. The 12 Navy SEALs moved like ghosts made manifest, using the chaos of the three-way firefight to close with the enemy forces. Their orbital drop had put them inside the Keftar perimeter, and they used that advantage to devastating effect. The alien sensors were designed to detect threats approaching from outside their formation, not enemies materializing in their rear areas. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Prophet Kim took point, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to target Keftar command personnel before they could coordinate a response. Her rifle spoke in whispers, depleted uranium penetrators finding gaps in alien armor with supernatural accuracy. Each shot eliminated not just an enemy soldier but a crucial node in their command network. Behind her, the rest of the team moved in perfect synchronization, their individual specialties combining into a weapon more deadly than any technology. Demolitions expert Chief Torres placed charges with surgical precision, bringing down Keftar heavy weapons positions with controlled explosions. Communications specialist Chief Martinez jammed enemy frequencies while simultaneously coordinating human and coalition forces through encrypted channels. But it was Rodriguez who provided the tactical genius that turned individual excellence into coordinated destruction. The SEAL team leader had positioned himself on the ridge overlooking the battle, his scope painting targets for the orbital assets still hidden in Mars' shadow. But instead of calling down kinetic strikes on the Keftar forces, he was doing something far more sophisticated. He was painting targets for the coalition soldiers below, feeding them real-time intelligence that turned their scattered resistance into focused lethality. Zephyrian Sniper, his voice cut through the tactical frequencies. Keftar Commander, bearing 270, range 300 meters. He's coordinating the eastern flank. The crystal-like being shifted its position instantly, its weapon finding the target with mechanical precision. The alien commander's head exploded in a shower of exotic matter, leaving his subordinates leaderless just as they were preparing to overrun Admiral Thexval's position. Gordanian Heavy, Rodriguez continued, his tactical awareness painting a three-dimensional picture of the battlefield. Energy projector team establishing position on the northern ridge. Take them now before they can finish setting up. The purple-scaled warrior was already moving, his massive form crossing open ground with surprising speed. He reached the Keftar position just as they were activating their weapon, his natural armor absorbing their hasty shots while his fists reduced sophisticated alien technology to expensive scrap metal. Sarah Chen, still standing guard over the American flag despite her injuries, watched the battle unfold with growing amazement. The coalition forces that had been mocking human military traditions 5 minutes ago were now fighting with a ferocity and creativity that would have made any Marine proud. They were learning, adapting, becoming something more than the sum of their individual capabilities. But the real revelation came when Admiral Thexval himself joined the fight. The hegemony commander moved with predatory grace across the battlefield, his personal weapons cutting through Keftar armor like tissue paper. But, instead of fighting alone, he was coordinating with the human SEALs, using their intelligence and his superior firepower to create a tactical synergy that neither force could have achieved independently. Chief Rodriguez, the Admiral's voice cut through the combat chatter. I have a clear shot at their primary command node, but I need suppressing fire on the eastern approach. Prophet, Torres, you heard the Admiral, Rodriguez replied without hesitation. Light them up. The two SEALs opened fire with mechanical precision, their weapons keeping the Keftar forces pinned down while Admiral Fexval advanced to his target. The alien commander moved like liquid death, his centuries of combat experience evident in every motion. His shot was perfect, eliminating the Keftar command center in a flash of exotic energy. The effect was immediate and devastating. Without their central coordination, the Keftar assault forces began to falter. Their perfect tactical formation dissolved into confusion as individual units tried to adapt to the loss of their command structure. They had been designed to fight as a unified organism, and removing their brain had crippled their effectiveness. But the battle was far from over. More Keftar dropships were descending from orbit, their hulls glowing with atmospheric friction as they prepared to reinforce the assault. Rodriguez's tactical display showed at least 50 enemy vessels inbound, each one carrying enough firepower to finish what the first wave had started. Even with the coalition forces now fighting effectively, they didn't have the numbers or equipment to withstand that kind of assault. Which was when Sarah Chen made a decision that would be remembered in military academies for generations to come. The wounded Marine pulled a device from her tactical vest with shaking hands, her vision graying around the edges as blood loss finally began to take its toll. The device was a standard military transponder, designed to broadcast identification signals to friendly forces. But Chen had modified it during the hours-long battle, turning it into something else entirely. Rodriguez, she called out, her voice barely audible over the sound of gunfire. I'm transmitting tactical data to every human military satellite in the system. Real-time battlefield intelligence, command frequencies, targeting solutions. The SEAL team leader understood immediately. Chen was turning her transponder into a beacon, broadcasting not just her location but everything the Coalition and SEAL forces had learned about Keftar tactics and weaknesses. Every human military asset within communication range would receive the data: orbital platforms, stealth frigates, underground bunkers, survivor groups hiding in the ruins of Earth's colonies. That signal will give away our position, Admiral Fexval warned, his weapon still tracking Keftar targets with mechanical precision. Every enemy force in the system will converge on this location. Chen's smile was grim but genuine. That's the point, Admiral. Sometimes the best defense is to make yourself such a tempting target that the enemy can't resist coming after you. Rodriguez felt a surge of professional respect for the wounded Marine. Chen was implementing one of the most dangerous tactics in special operations warfare, the deliberate creation of a target so valuable that the enemy would commit everything to destroying it. She was turning their position into bait, drawing every available Keftar force to the single point where human and coalition forces could destroy them in detail. Prophet, Rodriguez called to his second-in-command. How long until those orbital platforms can provide fire support? Chief Kim consulted her tactical display with professional calm. 12 minutes until the stealth frigates can reach optimal firing position. 15 minutes until the orbital bombardment platforms can acquire targets. Rodriguez looked at the approaching Keftar reinforcements and did the math. They had 12 minutes to hold their position against increasingly overwhelming odds, knowing that every enemy soldier they faced now was one less that would threaten human colonies elsewhere in the system. Admiral, he called to Fexval. Your people ready to find out how humans really fight? The hegemony commander's predatory features showed what might have been anticipation. Chief Rodriguez, I believe we are about to receive an education in warfare that our military academies could never provide. Rodriguez grinned behind his tactical mask as he watched the next wave of Keftar dropships beginning their final approach. The aliens thought they were attacking a broken defensive position held by wounded coalition forces and a handful of human operators. They had no idea they were flying into the killing ground that humanity had spent 3 centuries perfecting, the place where superior technology met superior will and discovered which one really mattered when everything was on the line. All units, he broadcast on all frequencies. Welcome to school. The final assault began with the precision of a clockwork universe and ended with the chaos of a supernova. 50 Keftar dropships descended through the Martian atmosphere like a plague of metallic locusts, their formation perfect, their timing synchronized to the microsecond. Each vessel carried 40 of the galaxy's most efficient killers, beings bred for conquest across 100 worlds. Their sensors had analyzed the battlefield, calculated the defensive positions, and determined that victory was mathematically inevitable. They were wrong. The first lesson in human warfare came from the orbital platforms hidden in Mars' shadow. The weapons that struck the lead dropships weren't the energy beams or plasma cannons that galactic militaries had used for millennia. They were chunks of tungsten moving at a significant fraction of light speed, kinetic kill vehicles that turned Einstein's equations into instruments of destruction. The Keftar shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and molecular disruptors, simply ceased to exist when struck by several tons of metal moving at relativistic velocities. The lead dropships didn't explode, they evaporated, their constituent atoms scattered across the Martian sky in brief flashes of nuclear fire. But the surviving vessels adapted with the mechanical efficiency of their species, spreading their formation and activating countermeasures designed to defeat kinetic weapons. They would lose perhaps a dozen ships to the orbital bombardment, but 40 would still reach the surface with more than enough firepower to eliminate the human and coalition forces below. The second lesson came from the stealth frigates that materialized from behind Mars' larger moon-like predators emerging from tall grass. Captain Rebecca Reaper Torres commanded the USS Phantom, a vessel that officially didn't exist in any military database. Her ship was a masterpiece of human paranoia made manifest, designed to hide from sensors that hadn't been invented yet, armed with weapons that violated 3 interstellar treaties, and crewed by personnel who had volunteered for missions that couldn't be acknowledged by any government. The Phantom's opening salvo wasn't aimed at the Keftar dropships, it was aimed at the space around them. Dozens of small munitions spread through the alien formation, each one deploying a cloud of metallic chaff that interfered with their navigation systems. The dropships found themselves flying blind through an artificial asteroid field, their perfect formation dissolving into chaos as they tried to avoid collisions with debris clouds moving at orbital velocities. The third lesson came from Rodriguez and his team on the ground. The Navy SEAL had spent the last few minutes placing microcharges with surgical precision, turning the landing zone into a carefully orchestrated death trap. The charges weren't large enough to destroy the dropships, but they didn't need to be. When the Keftar vessels finally reached the surface, they found themselves landing on ground that had been transformed into quicksand. The shaped charges detonated in sequence, each explosion precisely calculated to destabilize the Martian regolith beneath the landing sites. Dropships that should have touched down on solid ground instead found themselves sinking into suddenly liquefied soil, their hulls tilting at impossible angles as their landing gear found no purchase. The Keftar assault forces that emerged from the crippled vessels were disoriented, scattered, and facing an enemy that had turned the very ground beneath their feet into a weapon. But the real lesson, the one that would echo through galactic military academies for the next 1,000 years, came from what happened next. Admiral Fexval rose from his defensive position with the fluid grace of a born predator, his personal weapons charging with deadly light. But, instead of advancing alone, he moved in perfect coordination with Master Chief Kim and her SEAL team. The alien commander's superior firepower provided covering fire while the human operators used their superior mobility to flank enemy positions. The Gordanian heavy weapons specialist found himself fighting alongside Chief Torres, the demolitions expert. The purple-scaled warrior's natural armor absorbed Keftar energy blasts while Torres placed charges with surgical precision, each explosion eliminating enemy strongpoints that would have taken hours to reduce with conventional assault. The crystal-like Zephyrian sniper worked in tandem with Chief Martinez, the communications specialist. The alien's superhuman accuracy eliminated high-value targets while Martinez coordinated orbital fire support, turning each shot into the centerpiece of a larger tactical symphony. And, in the center of it all, Sarah Chen still stood guard over the American flag, her rifle tracking targets with mechanical precision despite the blood loss that should have rendered her unconscious. She had become something more than a wounded Marine, she had become a symbol of the principle that some things were worth defending regardless of the odds. The Keftar forces, designed to fight as a unified organism, found themselves facing something they had never encountered before, a true combined arms operation where different species with completely different capabilities fought as a single, adaptive entity. Human creativity merged with alien technology, tactical flexibility combined with superior firepower, and individual excellence became collective invincibility. It was Rodriguez who delivered the final stroke. The SEAL team leader had been moving through the battle like a ghost made flesh, his tactical awareness painting a three-dimensional picture of the engagement that no single being should have been able to maintain. But, instead of using that awareness for his own advantage, he had been sharing it, broadcasting real-time intelligence to every friendly force on the battlefield. Coalition soldiers who had never worked with humans found themselves receiving targeting data that arrived before they even knew they needed it. SEAL operatives discovered that alien weapons systems could be integrated with human tactics in ways that multiplied their effectiveness exponentially. The whole force was fighting with a level of coordination that should have been impossible given their different species, training, and doctrine. When the last Keftar dropship touched down and disgorged its assault forces, they found themselves facing something that their strategic databases had assured them was impossible, a defensive position that got stronger the more pressure was applied to it. "This is impossible," the Keftar field commander transmitted on open frequencies, his mechanical voice carrying undertones of what might have been confusion. "Our intelligence indicated scattered resistance and minimal coordination. How are they achieving this level of tactical integration?" Rodriguez answered the question himself, his voice broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously. "Because you made the same mistake everyone makes when they fight humans, Commander. You assumed we'd fight fair." The SEAL triggered his final surprise, a network of microsatellites that had been deploying throughout the battle, each one no larger than a marble butt, equipped with sensors sophisticated enough to track individual Keftar soldiers. The satellites had been mapping enemy positions, analyzing their tactics, and feeding that information to a targeting computer that would have made the galaxy's finest military AI jealous. But the targeting computer wasn't artificial intelligence, it was Rodriguez himself, enhanced by human technology but driven by human intuition, processing tactical information at a rate that should have been physiologically impossible. The orbital bombardment that followed was surgical in its precision. Tungsten rods fell from heaven like the wrath of forgotten gods, each one targeted at a specific enemy position, timed to arrive in sequence to maximize psychological impact. The Keftar forces found themselves under attack from an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't understand. In the space of 30 seconds, their overwhelming numerical advantage was reduced to scattered survivors hiding in whatever cover they could find. Admiral Fexbel lowered his weapons as the last echoes of combat faded across the Martian landscape. Around him, Coalition soldiers and Navy SEALs were checking equipment and treating wounds with the professional calm of warriors who had survived another impossible battle. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of alien technology, but the flag that Saracen had defended still flew proudly from its bent pole. "I need to revise my assessment of human military capabilities," the Admiral said quietly, his predatory features showing what might have been wonder. "Your species doesn't just weaponize technology, you weaponize concepts. Ideas. Principles that have no physical form but change the nature of reality itself." Rodriguez emerged from the ruins where he'd been coordinating the final phase of the battle, his camouflage suit deactivating to reveal a man who looked more like a college professor than one of the galaxy's deadliest warriors. "That's the thing about fighting for something bigger than yourself, Admiral. It makes you capable of things that should be impossible." Chen had finally collapsed against the flagpole, her rifle still in her hands but her eyes closed as medics worked to stabilize her condition. Blood loss and exhaustion had taken their toll, but she was still breathing, still alive, still defending the symbol that had brought this unlikely alliance together. "The flag," Admiral Fexbel said, looking at the tattered fabric with new understanding. "It's not about the cloth itself. It's about what the cloth represents. The idea that ordinary beings can choose to become extraordinary when something important is at stake." "Now you're getting it," Rodriguez replied. "And that's why humans don't surrender, Admiral. Because surrender means abandoning the idea that some things are worth fighting for regardless of the odds. Once you give up that idea, you stop being human." The Admiral studied the battlefield around them, taking in the impossible victory that human and coalition forces had achieved through sheer determination and tactical creativity. His species had been spacefaring for millennia, had conquered enemies that could reshape matter itself, and commanded technologies that bordered on the magical. But they had never learned to fight like this, with desperate creativity, absolute determination, and the unshakable belief that principles were more important than survival. "I believe," Admiral Fexbel said slowly, "that the Galactic Coalition has much to learn from humanity. Not about technology or strategy, but about something far more important." "What's that?" Rodriguez asked. The Admiral's predatory smile was genuine now, carrying respect instead of condescension. "How to turn impossible odds into inevitable victory through the simple act of refusing to quit." Above them, the American flag snapped in the Martian wind, its colors bright against the alien sky. And, across the galaxy, word was already spreading about the battle where humans had taught the universe's most advanced civilizations the true meaning of warfare, not as a test of technology or numbers, but as a test of will. The lesson would not be forgotten.